you all. All right, welcome, and it's good to have you back today. We're going to continue to work on our tools as we work our way through this series. As per what we said last time, we like to kind of think about, if you give a chance to chat, if you've used some of the tools that we have talked about previously. So I like to leave a space at the beginning. Has anybody had a chance to do any of the tools that we've talked about so far? Have you had a chance to maybe use that tool of taking stock and comparing those different values, or maybe the empathy map or know your culture questions? Has anyone looked at those, used those, have any comments about those since we talked last time? Anybody want to share anything, and or also questions about how you might use them or thoughts you might have about them? Do we have anything in either or any of those categories as we get started today? And if you do, please feel free to just unmute. Robert says alternate art in response to my appreciation of his artwork. All right, so
Hi, Matt.
oh,
I'm Denise. I actually work with the Maryland Department of Health, and so I was not able to implement any of the tools with any staff at this point, but I was able to kind of walk through the culture tool just
mm-hmm.
myself to try to see where do I see us sitting with this. And I think it's a really useful tool, and I'm actually looking forward to using that. We have some new staff that are coming on board as well, so I think it'll be an interesting conversation starter and a way for us to gel and glue and look at our culture in terms of moving forward. So thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks for those comments, Denise. I think that's an important idea that you're sharing. I share tools from a team perspective. How can these work with your team? It doesn't mean that they're exclusively team tools. They can be used for for individual reflections. And I think that's what you were just describing. You can look at those and you can look at the values, for example, and just use it as a personal reflection. What do I value the most on this list? What does that say about me? What does that say about how I see my work or my life? Or so all of these tools can be used in multiple ways. I tend to focus a lot of my work in the zone of team stuff, um, and but that's not the exclusive utilization for these tools. So thanks for reminding us of that. That's helpful. All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll talk about some more tools. As we as we were saying, this is our series that we're going to be continuing to work on together, a series of 8 conversations that we'll be having. And so just a reminder to everybody with some of our introductory materials, a funding disclaimer, our SAMHSA funding, that the views expressed are not necessarily SAMHSA's views, and SAMHSA is the funder, Department of Health and Human Services. Also, a reminder with regard to language. We want to destigmatize. We have to be mindful of language to make sure that we're not creating any stigmas, that we're using language that is person-centered, person-first language, not thinking of people as any challenge or struggle or diagnosis that they may have, but as people who are unique and distinct individuals, and acknowledge people's personhood first and foremost. And then to think about this sequence for technical assistance, if you have a need for technical assistance, how you can submit that request and get feedback and receive a plan and a delivery. So if you have any needs for technical assistance, you can certainly contact PRCOE for further details on how to receive those kinds of supports. And as we reminded before, we appreciate the respectful nature in which you all engage in this dialogue that we have, and be mindful of other people's ability to hear and see. and identifying yourselves. And we had a great dialogue last time, and I think we'll just continue to do that. And I like the way you all engage as a group. So as far as housekeeping, I think we're doing just fine. And and as a reminder, this is kind of our sequence where we kind of think about past tools, think about a new tool, and give you a chance to use it, to try it. Um, so we're working our way through these three portions of our series: knowing your partners, knowing your environment, and then the third one, knowing your plan. Um, so we're in this sort of part two section now where we start to think about knowing the environment and the organization. So what's the boat like? What's the water that we're swimming in like? So we have some tools that we're going to talk about related to those territories. So I think we'll start with that environmental scan and the SWOT and SOAR as a way to think about the environment. And again, these are tools that you can use with your team, tools that you can use individually as well, that should be helpful in assisting you to think about what your environment is like. So let's talk a little bit about these. So environmental scan is probably a phrase that some of you have heard before. It's a it's a tool or a concept that's been around for a long time. There are different ways to frame it. There are different elements that some people put into it. These are sort of a simple, I think, good version. As I think you've heard me say before, I like simple versions of tools because I think they have the most utility. They're the most flexible, right? I mean, you can do a lot with a good set of pliers, simple tool, but they can do a whole bunch of stuff, right? So I like simple tools that can do a lot of things. So that's this kind of tool. I should probably come up with an equivalent other representations, pliers. What's a simple tool? Somebody give me a simple tool that you use that can do a whole bunch of different things. Maybe a kitchen tool for people who like to cook. What's a simple tool that you use all the time in the kitchen? Anybody have one that comes to mind?
Spatula.
Spatula, the go-to spatula. Absolutely. That's a good one. Use it all the time. I sometimes eat with one because it's easy to get the stuff out of the bottom of the jar than it is with a spoon. I don't like to waste the last little bits at the bottom. Maybe that's too much self-disclosure, Diana. See, sorry about that. All right, pot holder, whisk. Pot holders are big too. Thank you for those of you who are sharing some in the chat. Right, these are simple tools that we use all the time, right? There's these go-to things. The butter knife. How many days do you go without using a butter knife? I don't imagine there's been a day in years where I haven't used the butter knife. It's like I always use that, right? So these are the kinds of tools that we're talking about that are the equivalent of those, right? The things that we use all the time that are very practical and manageable for us. So I think that a lot of you are doing informal environmental scans all the time. You're just not calling them environmental scans. How often are you thinking about the social environment, the people uh, who are interconnected with you in relationship to you as it relates to you doing the work that you do? At the macro level, bigger systems might think of this as sort of macro, where interaction between different organizations across different states, different locations, or the micro level, your own individual neighborhood or team or community and the relationships you have there. What about the economics? We could probably talk quite a bit about the macro systems economics as it relates to peer support services, as it relates to human services, as it relates to promotion of the kinds of values that you try to promote in your work. We might say that we do a lot of important, powerful preventive work or that promotes human dignity and human wellness. And sometimes our system doesn't tend to reward those efforts economically. It tends to reward the systems that help people to get healthy once they've gotten really sick, but it doesn't tend to promote the ones that are preventive of that sickness in the first place. And so those are major economic factors in the macro system. And then in the micro system, our own team, how do we get paid? How are we um, financed for what we do? How do we maintain a healthy team? How do we plan for being able to meet our financial needs, pay our team effectively, be able to retain staff, et cetera. And then political. What's what's something that you think of politically that has an impact on the work that you do? Are there political elements that you think are a part of your environment that impact how you do what you do? What comes to mind for you? Anybody want to share something? You can put it in the chat or you can say it out loud. How do politics impact you?
This is Denise again, from Maryland's Department of
Hmm.
Health as well. So we're restricted in terms of our funding to, do things like legislature, work with the legislature or promote certain legislation. We have to stay in our lane in terms of just advocating or educating for services and things of that nature. So we have to remain bound. We do remain bound by some of those restrictions that we have for our funding. So that can impact us in terms of our planning and actions that we take.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Well framed, Denise. So you're educating people, and there's certain kinds of personal advocacy. And if you decided to take on another kind of advocacy, maybe some signs out in front of the building with big exclamation points supporting a certain kind of a perspective related to something. Is that inside or outside of your scope of what you're supposed to do? Is that something that your funder is in alignment with? Are there political challenges given the nature of the funding resource, if it's governmental dollars and elected officials who may or may not agree with the stuff that's on the sign and the exclamation points at the back end of whatever that statement is? And well, those are pretty significant political implications at the macro level and then also at the program or individual level as well. So we have to be mindful of the environment in which we're operating, particularly the environment in which we're receiving our resources and the requirements attached to that. So all of you have certain political considerations in what you do. Sometimes they're big and formal, right? And sometimes they're quiet. Sometimes they're, well, our organization really is not a big fan of a certain something. So, if we do that, we can't do it loudly, or we're not allowed to do that at all. And that's something I do on my own time because our organization is not in a position to support that particular thing that I value. So I do that on my own time. So these are political elements, right? And decision making. And then technologies. How is technology impacting what you do? Are there current technologies or developments that are changing the way you do things? They're changing the broader field of the work that you do, or that are changing some of the specific things that you do. Can somebody share an example um, of technology that you see changing how you do your work? What's a technology that you've seen that has changed your work substantially? And technology is not just computers, by the way. Could be other things. Usually we think of computers and phones, right? I mean, which it is, of course, and those can make big differences. Um, Speaking of which, I think, as if I recall, Cindy, Chris had advisement with regard to AI assistant during the meeting, right? You can maybe give me a little tutorial on that because it's perfectly timed because I just said technology and then we had an AI assistant.
We do, and our university policy is that we don't accept that. I'm not sure of the reason. So if I see that, I'm able to make the entity exit and the person can stay. But for now, yeah. And I'd love to see the other end of it. I'd love to see what we get back from using the AI to
Yeah.
be part of it.
Yeah, perfect example of an emerging technology that systems are trying to figure out how to work with and how to manage, right? So as part of our environmental scan, this is an emerging technology in the sphere of our trainings and communications. How does it work? What are the risks or concerns that certain systems have? Whether or not those are accurate and reasonable concerns. That's not our for our consideration today. Whenever there's a evolving and new technologies, we have to sort them out and figure out how to use them. And there's always some angst in doing that, right? Whenever we do something new, think about how we started using different technologies and considering people's privacy. For example, texting and phone calling and different kinds of social media and people's privacy and having people engage with each other related to personal issues that they might be exploring as part of a treatment or as part of the some kind of a recovery support that they're engaged in. And how do we manage privacy with those technologies, and how do we manage sort of respect for people in those environments? All these things that we have to sort out with technology. So, so as I said, you're constantly doing environmental scans as part of what you do. You're constantly looking across these different categories. It can be helpful sometimes to just put them on a grid. I'm a big fan of simple grids, which allow you to consider different categories. What's going on in these four categories, either at the bigger systems level or the smaller systems. And macro and micro are just kind of generic categories. Think of macro as bigger systems within the broader community, within the state, within the country. Micro, you might think of as individual organizations, individual teams, maybe your local community. You could think of that also as micro as well. Some people put a middle category in there, a meso category, so you have big, medium, and small. I usually just think of it as big and small, and then you can just kind of be subjective about how you excuse me, use those categories. Excuse me, I got the hiccups now. That never happens when I'm doing training. Hopefully it'll go away. I say it never happens. I guess I can't say that anymore. Um, so so thinking about this environmental scan to kind of get a deeper understanding, right? If you fill out that grid in each of those categories, I'm curious if we take a minute to have you just look at that, take a minute to just draw that grid for yourself. It's just 4 rows and then 3 columns. And then it's actually 5 rows because you have the top one on there. And then the macro and the micro and the social and the economic and the political and the technological. And what are the things that you notice in any of those boxes that are big impacts for you right now? What's something that just kind of jumps out at you like, there's a big issue in the macro or the micro box in one of those 4 rows? And if anybody would like to share something as you sort of take a look at that, that pops out for you, what are you thinking? Carrie's talking about wearable technology and newly developed apps. Yeah, there's a good example of some great technology. Wi-Fi hotspots. Yes, these are great technologies. So what pops out for you all if you look at that grid like, that's a sector where things are big for us right now. What do you think? Either for you organizationally or maybe as a broader field, or in the broader realm of peer recovery supports. What do you think? Economics is a big one, right? Yes, thank you, Carrie. Yeah, always economics. Um, Getting funding. I was sort of alluding to that earlier when I said that certain kinds of supports seem to get funded more powerfully or rapidly based on broader social or cultural norms, and certain other kinds of supports don't seem to be as readily or easily funded at the same levels based upon people's awareness, based upon values, based upon priorities. So how do we think about that at the macro level and the micro level? Sometimes you might think about your economics, and this is the case in a lot of human service environments where we have our micro funding, how do we get resources? And then we have our macro funding considerations, which are often how do we advocate at the federal, state, city, whatever levels? How do we, raise the flag to make sure that people know what we do and why it's important and why it should be funded? And so how do we spend our time and resources to do the macro side to support the work? Stacy said social demographics, reentry, recidivism in our area is a hot button topic. So social demographics, those social issues, right? Hey, Stacy, can you come off mute and maybe say a little something about that? Because that's a common one. That's a good one for us to think about for a minute.
Sure. We, in our area, we got a grant from the state to provide peer support in the prison, and then we also follow them as they re-enter the community and provide the support. So currently the Pennsylvania Commission of Crime and Delinquency is like throwing money at reentry and recidivism. So our county commissioners are also, they're building a new prison, and they're working on how peer support programs fit in to the new prison. They're asking us to be sort of on the panel discussing what's needed at the facility, like what would we need. So we would need a couple offices, ideally, in the prison, if we could get that. But right now here anyway, it's really a big hot topic.
Yeah. You raise a good point around the conversations, and I've been hearing that a lot recently. There's a political awareness, and you hear that question. So how can peer support, peer services be a part of this initiative? Where will they be used? How can we have that resource be a part of our effort? And getting there's the initial step, which is nobody even knowing what peer support is, right? And peer support people saying, hey, we should be a part of that, and people saying back, well, what are you again? That was where we started, right? And then moving toward, we should have peer support as part of this. Why don't we tell the peer support people what they should do, right? Because we value it, and we're going to tell them how they should do their thing within our system. And then toward what you're starting to describe, which is, hey, peer support people come to the table as one of the key partners in helping to design and implement this, because we're valuing you as partners. We're seeing you as partners. So you have, as you just described, a voice at that table to talk about how to do this. So we see this evolution that's worth noting. And I think that is clearly a very clear political evolution across time toward the good in terms of inclusion, right?
Absolutely.
Having the opportunity. So that's a really good example. And you described it at the macro level, at the state level, and you'd also described it at more the micro level, or the local community or local committee of people who are doing the implementation planning.
Yeah.
So those are both really good examples of using this grid to kind of think about those categories. So your example is a really good one. Thanks for sharing it. Anybody else have one that shows up for you that's like a biggie when you look at this grid, like, there's a category that I'm really needing to pay attention to right now? What else comes up for people? So my encouragement would be for you to just take a simple grid like this and just take a little bit of time thinking about what the environment looks like. It's an environmental scan. So the metaphor of scanning is intentional, right? So the idea is to just scan the horizon. You've heard people use that phrase, right? Scan the horizon. We just look all the way around, 360-degree. People use that metaphor too. A 360 assessment, right? Meaning we're going to look everywhere we can look, all the way around in a circle. We're scanning this horizon and looking for issues related to social, economic, political, technologies at the local level, scanning the horizon and looking close, scanning the horizon and looking off into the distance, right? The big picture, right? Imagine you're standing in a flat spot. Some of you live in flat spots, some of you live in hilly spots. If you live in a flat spot, you know, if you stand in one spot, you can see quite a ways to the horizon, especially if you find a little rise. If you live on a plain, you know, you can look quite a way, quite a few miles down the road that way. So we're trying to do that at the macro level, bigger system, looking out far, also looking close. So think about this as kind of doing that 360 and using these categories is just a way to kind of create a checkbox to think about what might work for you. This is not a magical list. This is just a simple grid. Like I said, I like simple tools. If you were to search environmental scans, you'll see a number of different versions and categories and some of them more complicated. Feel free to go look and see what works for you. You might find certain categories that are a good fit for you that are different from these, then use those. You know, use what suits you to try to have a way to do that scanning process. All right, so now I want to talk about this other tool called the SWOT analysis. I'm sure people have heard of this one. It's a pretty common phrase, whether or not you've used it. SWOT, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It has some mixed interpretations because some people aren't really thrilled with the deficit-based elements in it. You'll see at the top I have this positive and negative sign here, right? The plus and the minus. So the thing with the SWOT is that it's got stuff on the positive side to the left, which is strengths and opportunities, and stuff on the negative side to the right, which are weaknesses and threats. It's also, and this is a point that I like to underscore, a lot of people use this tool, but they don't use this other variable, which is the internal and external components. So strengths and weaknesses that are internal to our team organization, right? Who are we? What are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? And then opportunities and threats that are external to us, right? So things that are out, again, that environmental scanning, these are related tools. That's why we're talking about them together. What are the opportunities out there as we scan the horizon? What are the threats that are out there as we scan the horizon? Now, these things are internal and external. One of the ways that this tool kind of falls down is that some people will say, oh, threats. Um, we have some tension between a couple of our team members, and it's causing some challenges to our productivity and our teamwork and our mood and our workspace is kind of struggling. We should really think of that as an internal weakness, not as a threat. The threat would be, is there some external stressor that's maybe sort of creating some sort of a challenge for us, and that's resulting in us having some tensions, and then maybe we're having a difficult time getting along with each other because of that, or so that might be the threat. So really making that distinction between the things that are internal to us and the things that are external to us. And the way people use this is to just kind of simply think about those boxes and fill in the boxes. Sometimes people use it in relation to a particular activity. We're trying to implement this new thing. We're trying to do a certain something. And do we have strengths and weaknesses within our internal system? Do we have opportunities and threats in our environment? That we need to think about as we consider how to move forward. Somebody give me your sense of how this tool may have been used by you or within any system in which you've used. Has anyone had a chance to be a part of using this SWOT tool in the past? I always like to hear if there's an anecdote you could share if you've used this. All right, so maybe people haven't used this one before. What do you think about this idea of the weaknesses and threats? Sometimes folks will say, well, that seems kind of deficit based. I don't know if I'm really crazy about that idea. There's an alternative to that SWOT that some people like, which is called SOAR. So I want to check in with you on this idea and see what you think. So SOAR is about 4 questions. Strengths, just like we had with SWOT. What makes us proud? Opportunities, just like we had with SWOT. How do we make sense of the opportunities in our environment? Again, environmental scan connection there. Then aspirations, what do we care deeply about? So now we're staying sort of strength-based here, right? And then the 4th part for the SOAR is results. How do we know we are succeeding? And then how do the answers to these questions align with and or support your plans? So SOAR is different than SWOT. So SWOT's got that strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. SOAR's got strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. So some people would say this comes kind of from an appreciative inquiry, positive psychology orientation, strength-based orientation versus SWOT, which includes those weaknesses and threats. What are your thoughts? What are your reactions as I compare these 2 ways of kind of getting at the same thing of doing an analysis to see how we're doing? Do we want to include the threats and weaknesses, or do you like this SOAR list better? What do you think? Anybody have any thoughts in reaction to this?
I prefer the SWOT.
Mm-hmm.
I like having the weaknesses and threats because I feel like it can. I'm somewhat of a black and white person, and so this way, if I can list something as a weakness or a threat, then it gives me something to work on, like
Yeah.
to think about to work on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I totally hear that. Now, this is where we'll have different perspectives, which is, of course, why we have different tools. Diana, in contrast to what Stacy may have been describing, says, and I'm going to go to Christina as well. Diana, you're thinking you like this SOAR idea. Can you say why you like this SOAR idea? No. Diana cannot
No,
say, but just does.
yeah, not because it takes out the threats, and I don't know. I just prefer it.
Sometimes it just feels comfortable. It's the way you like to think. It's the way you like to interact with ideas to stay on the positive side of them. That's a pretty common response, actually. Um, that's kind of the orientation that you have. Frankly, I hear that a lot as it relates to peer support kinds of service environments because it really is a strength-based value set and a strength-based culture because it's kind of pushing against a traditional model of a lot of deficit-based models and care plans and systems, which kind of were stigmatizing and deficit in orientation. So anything that has deficits in it is sometimes let's question, do we want to include that or not? And it makes sense within the culture and the value set that we see around peer recovery, right? So I think that's perfectly reasonable. Um, so we had Starlene saying SOAR appears more trauma informed, right? Yeah. Um, so that makes sense. Christina talks about using SWOT. Now, Christina, you have a thoughtful way of thinking about what threat means to you. Do you want to share anything else about that out loud? Because I think he's
I,
helpful.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So when you use threats, you can look at it as something that is totally out of our control. Like if you're looking at maybe providing more space, more housing, zoning issues, maybe the political aspect of it. Those are things that could be considered threats, but they're not necessarily things that we're doing wrong. It's just things we have to work around. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Those are obstacles. Those are barriers. We
Mhm.
could call it the SWAB, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and barriers. Maybe
Right,
people would
right.
like it. Maybe people would like it if it was the SWAB instead of the SWAT.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind barriers in that. So,
Right. Yeah. Actually, I think it would feel a little neutral because threats is emotionally, we react emotionally to the word threats. Threats are
Right.
dangerous. Threats are hostile. Threats are aggressive. Those are all kind of trigger words or trigger ideas which come from the word threats. I think that's part of the challenge with this tool is that that word does that. I think weaknesses does it as well, because we're constantly trying to be strength based. So weaknesses is the opposite of that, and it's like, oh, we don't want to focus on weaknesses. So that's actually a fun exercise to think about how you might change the SWOT and go from SWOT to something else if we got rid of threats and changed weaknesses to barriers, and we could or excuse me, change threats to barriers. And what could we change weaknesses to make it more palatable and still be an acronym that we can say, all right, now I'm asking too much. It's asking too much now. That would be too difficult. But you get the idea, right? This all comes into play as we think about these ideas. How do we react to the words and react to the concepts? What do they mean to us? What's our definition? What's our understanding of that language, right? So that's pretty important. And the word threats, the language of threats is, that's impactful for people. All right, so we think about the SOAR as a different orientation again. And sometimes people will say, I like the SWOT because I'm familiar with it. And they say, well, the SOAR, well, this seems kind of new to me. Give me a chance to kind of look at it. Denise is saying, I like SOAR, but would want to assess any unintended consequences of potential opportunities and resulting potential actions so that we can avoid. Yeah, so opportunities and actions. So what are we going to do? And so I hear you wanting this balance, which is we want to be strength-based and positive focused, and we also want to be mindful of the implications of our actions. Where does this take us? Hey, that road looks nice. Let's turn down that road. Well, is it the right road we want to be on? Does it take us where we want to go? Is it passable? Is it is it in any way dangerous or unsafe? Is it have a guardrail when you go around the corner? What's this path going to lead us to? Right? Is it going to work out for us? So that's kind of how we can look at the SOAR idea. Um, so a couple of ideas about when we look at the SOAR, I'll take a minute to just share these with you so that you can think about this tool because usually the SOAR is less familiar to people. So you can think about these 4 letters: strengths, what makes us proud. So here are some questions to think about as it relates to what makes you proud. These questions I think can be really helpful when you're trying to do some team building, right? When you're trying to work with your group. What makes us unique, greatest achievements, um, getting results, how do we fit into the environment? What about us is world class? Those are good team building activity exercises or questions. The SOAR opportunities. Um, what are people asking for? Top 3 opportunities, new customers. How do we differentiate ourselves in our marketplace? How do we address challenges and turn them into opportunities? That's similar to what we were talking about earlier, right? A challenge can be an opportunity. Aspirations. Who are we? Where should we, who should we become? Where should we go? What is our most compelling aspiration? What would support our aspirations? What should we do that would support us in trying to go where we want to go? So those aspirations are really important questions that you can ask yourself as a team. And then results. How do we know we're succeeding? What are the key indicators? If we had a scorecard for ourselves to say, yes, we're doing well, we're achieving results, what would indicate that we're achieving results? What would be on our scorecard? And what do we need? What resources do we need to implement new things? Some people like to use these 5 I's: initiate, inquire, imagine, innovate, and inspire as a way of thinking about these SOAR ideas. So we initiate something we want to do. We ask questions by inquiring. We imagine, brainstorm, kind of connect with each other, come up with innovations, and try to inspire ourselves to implement the new thing. So I appreciate your comments as it relates to the SWOT and the SOAR. I want to kind of wrap us up now, maybe give you a few minutes to take a moment to take that, maybe to take that environmental scan grid and kind of think about that for yourselves. Maybe make a SWOT grid and think about that for yourselves. Um, uh, or pick one of these to take a few minutes to do, or look at those SOAR questions and think about what that might mean for you organizationally. And if you're just needing the reminder of the SOAR, it's strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. And use one of these. I would encourage you to use one of these right now. Take a few minutes to consider it, and maybe use one of these the next time you're getting together with team members to think about where you're going, what you're doing, where you're going. And this could be a nice tool for you to help to plan and to help to engage your partners. And so I want to wrap up a little early to give you a chance to go do that, to go take a minute to figure out which one of these three would make sense for you. I want to touch base, excuse me, back with Cindy and see if we had anything else we needed to cover before we wrap up.
We do
right.
not, but
All
we'd
right.
love to see you next week for more tools.
For sure. See everybody next week. Take a minute to look at this stuff. And then when we come back next week, let me know if you used any of these tools, environmental scan, SWOT, or SOAR, to help you on your journey. So we'll see you all next week. Be well, and I look
All right,
forward to it.
thanks, Matt. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.